Welcome to the Creative Condition podcast, an ongoing series of conversations and considerations to help people understand and embrace their own unique creativity for fulfilling lives and brilliant careers. My name is Ben Talon. I'm an illustrator and author, and I bring 16 years of creative industry experience working with the New York Times, The Guardian, the Premier League, and more. And I invite designers, artists, psychologists, scientists, coaches, athletes, sensitivity experts, and all kinds of thought leaders to help us broaden our knowledge of creativity. Creativity is a fundamental pillar of human happiness, a vital ingredient in the solutions to our problems, but so often misunderstood. The show is supported by founding sponsor and B Corp, Illustration X. Take a look at their stunning range of illustrators and animators at illustrationx.com. If you like the music for the show, it's by Dirty Freud, who you can listen to now on Spotify and all good music streaming services. Today I'm talking corporations funding creativity with content designer Caroline Christie, who brings me a fantastic angle on when AT&T shaped modern art. This was a piece she wrote. We're talking about Bell Labs, a research arm of AT&T. Experiments in art and technology, EAT, what that meant back then, the breakthroughs it brought, why it's lacking today, and what all of this means. This is the Creative Condition podcast. How are you doing, guys? I hope you're well. My name is Ben Talon. I'm your host. This is the Creative Condition podcast. Do check out the brand new home for the overall project, The Creative Condition. As you well know by now, my ongoing exploration of human creativity, helping you guys to maximize yours. That's over at thecreativecondition.com. 10 years doing this now, a decade. That's crazy, crazy, crazy stuff. I love it. Welcome if you're new, if you're a new listener, if you've stumbled across this through anything at all, let me know where you found me. I'm glad to have you on board. I appreciate my listeners, and I love especially to hear from you. Welcome back if you're a regular. Thank you for your ongoing support, and a massive thank you at the top of the show to founding sponsor Illustration X. Were it not for Harry Lyon-Smith, the MD of Illustration X, suggesting that I might be suited to podcasting, then not much of this would be happening. I wouldn't have gone on this 300 plus interview romp. I don't know what the word is, tear. That's a writer in me coming out now. But I love it. I love talking to people about creativity. I am in love with human creativity. It illuminates my life, and I want to see it elevated in society, because right now, it's tough. It's tough out there. It's really tough. You might have seen the recent Association of Illustrators consultation. So there's a survey they've set up in response to the government proposals about changes in copyright law to support artificial intelligence. It's not good for us guys. If they get the way they want, it means we have to opt out of having our work scraped for AI models. I think it's kind of dystopian. It's a massive fuck you to an industry that is pivotal to the cultural respect that Britain has had over the decades. We are loved for our arts, and rightly so. We've been pioneers in many fields, but that doesn't happen if it's not for a fertile market for people like myself and you, the listeners, to work in, to have legal protection from corporate shaftings such as this. So I implore you to go and fill it out. Please do take a moment. I know we have these busy 1,000 miles an hour lives. It can feel overwhelming trying to do all the things, but this is really, really important, because if we don't shout now, we don't challenge and at least have this amended, if not stopped, then we're going to be in the soup in a big way. We're going to be in big trouble, because once this goes, once the landscape has changed, there's no coming back. There's massive power in big tech that really alarms me at the moment. There's some really nefarious behaviours going on, one of which pops up in this conversation with Caroline today, and it is very worrying. We're going to have to be more adaptable than ever before, but there's only so much we can adapt. I was having this conversation with a friend recently, and I was having a financial panic, as you guys would have heard about when I share this stuff online. I spoke about getting a new pet insurance bill, which was kind of extreme, and that sent me into something of a financial tailspin as a freelancer who most months, I come in under what I need to earn, and I rely on that occasional big job to sort things out for the year. Last year was a year where that big job didn't come in, and I was left mining the savings to get by, and it kind of continues into this year. And I do come in full of a lot of faith, because you have to find a baseline of optimism in order to turn these things around. But there's only so much adapting we can do when entire markets are shifting and shafted and all that. And I think of friends who are electricians or builders, and can they just pivot on a, say sixpence? I don't think I've ever held a sixpence in my life, but can anyone pivot in such an extreme way? And I've been growing this thing, the Creative Condition, now for over a decade, as I mentioned. And I've found ways along the way to gradually begin to monetize it, but you can't do that overnight. Show me an electrician who can just go and walk right into another trade, plumbing, for example. Show me a plumber who can walk right into banking and get a job, or into AI. It doesn't happen. So we have to challenge this. So please do look it up and voice your discontent. And don't just shout on social media. Write to your MP. Take a direct action, because there's only us that can do it for ourselves. But that's enough of that. I hope you're feeling good. I hope you've been in good form for the new year, 2025. Like I said, head to thecreativecondition.com. The home is now live. You'll find resources for any budget. You got no budget, then you've got 300 plus episodes of this podcast talking to the most revered people practicing creativity right across not just the arts, but in industry, in cutting edge industries. I think of recent guests, Eleanor Samuelson from Innovation at UNICEF. Fascinating conversation. Helping the world's most vulnerable children through UX, through design, through pioneering strategies in technology. I think of Yasmin Ali, chemical engineer working in sustainable engineering. Check out a wonderful book, Power Up, about the global energy system and her experience of it. It's wonderful. And I'm going to be adding that to the Creative Condition reading list, which is another resource you can find on the website. You can buy my books. You can look up books in the list that I recommend that will nourish and add to your creativity in some way. If you've got a little budget and you want to work with me and you want to really get into your specific business or individual creativity, I'm offering my pit stop session for £400. It's usually £600. That is until the end of March. I can come to you in person if you're within a reachable distance from Salisbury here in the UK and do that. Trying to get out more this year. We can do it over Zoom if you're overseas or you don't fancy doing it in person. That's cool too. I love Zoom as a platform for doing this. And we basically work through all of your creativity. We go through everything that informs creativity. We look at personality, we look at current situation, hopes, fears, dreams, sense of humour, all of it. It's a deep process. It takes between 2.5 and 4 hours, and then I go away and spend that time again going through our conversation and writing up very specific, tailored notes of recommendation. It works for anyone, arts or beyond. You bring me your specifics, I will work with you on that front. I really, really love doing this. And I've got a couple booked in for late Jan. There are a few slots, late Jan, early Feb. So give me a shout. Fill out the form on the website on the coaching page, and then we will have a conversation. There's no obligation. I want to have a conversation to make sure that I can help you, that we are a good fit. If that's the case, I will explain how I think I can help you, and then we will sit down and do the session. So let me know. Like I said, that's on offer, 2/3 of the price until the end of March. Might sound like a lot of money, but when you look at the sort of business coaching and managerial coaching of other people, it's far more expensive. And this is a completely specific, unique process where I bring equal parts empathy and understanding of human condition. And I smash that together with my love and understanding and study over the last decade of creativity and help to get you on your way. So let me know if that's of interest too. Something for everyone and all budgets on there. I'm just trying to help creativity in general, try to elevate it in society. So what's been going on today? Caroline Christie, this is a fascinating conversation. She brought an article to me that she'd written for the platform she was working at the time, Little Atoms. You can find them at littleatoms.com, and it's called How AT&T Shaped Modern Art. From John Cage to Andy Warhol, the corporate behemoth financed some of avant-garde's biggest names. Very excited to bring in this conversation. It's a long one. You might want to split it into two, unless you've got a good studio session going on or a long walk, and then you can take in the whole thing. But we're talking about Bell Labs and EAT, Experiments of Art and Technology, which were two research arms of AT&T, and they basically funded putting together people from arts and people in industry, engineers and the likes, with no real conditions other than that they wanted them to be excited, they wanted them to collaborate, create, challenge problems, come up with ideas, and the hope would be that in there somewhere there would be incredible breakthroughs and new ways of thinking that they could then move forward with. It's beautiful. It's such a brave act of supporting creativity that I would love to see more and more now. I don't know if you remember the conversation with Dan Kieran. I think that might have been episode 179, but if you search for him in the archive, it's a wonderful conversation. Dan being the founder of Unbound publishing platform. And Dan talked about how under capitalism, the change has to be led by business because governments are beholden to business. And that is the kind of constraints we are locked in now with this system. This is a great example of what that might look like. So Caroline's going to tell you a lot more than I ever could. Like I said, Caroline's a brilliant content designer. She goes and works with businesses for periods of time. It's more on the words side of things and the brand as opposed to visual and design, but she's going to talk about her own arts education background, why she took that path. It's a very, very invigorating chat. So a big thank you to Caroline for doing that. I hope you enjoy it. I would love your feedback. Get that to me, ben@bentalon.com, or you could message me on LinkedIn. Email is always best. I will get back to you quicker there. I take email the most serious of all, but LinkedIn is my primary social media platform these days. I'm also active on Instagram. We've got Amy McNee coming up in March. Amy has written a wonderful book. I don't have it to hand. I've gone blank on the title, but it's about making art, fearlessly making art, how we need your art. Stop fucking around and make something is the subtitle. That's the one. We need your art. Stop fucking around and make something. It's a wonderful book full of so much great actionable advice and so much vulnerability. I'm talking to Pogus Caesar this morning as I record this, who is a wonderful British photographer who's done so much incredible documentary work over his career and life. Can't wait for that one. Got that coming up. Plenty more of the creative diary. I've got ideas for specific episodes at the moment. My mind is brimming. I need to balance that with my work, so watch this space. And do check out the Ukrainian Institute. I'm trying to support these guys. They support the Ukrainian creative community. And you can go and look at all that beautiful work at ui.org.ua. If you can just share it, that would be awesome. If you're in a position to commission somebody and support them in an even bigger way, brilliant too. Go and have a look. That's about it, I think. I think I've waffled on long enough. Let's bring you Caroline Christie. Keep in touch, get me your thoughts, head to thecreativecondition.com for everything that I'm doing. Nice one. Enjoy.
Well, all my family always say how much I read as a kid. I don't remember reading. Mum would be like, it'd be great. So Mum was like a lecturer in the evenings and cleaner during the day. And so because the lecturing work was kind of unsteady, so I would go to work with her and she'd be like, I could just get a book and sit in the corner and read it. And I don't remember ever being that engaged with reading, even though that's kind of ended up being my job. And I struggle to complete books now. So very quiet. I had a friend at school once say that I was a different person outside of school, in school. I was really shy and quiet in school and quite loud and obnoxious outside. Or at least, I think, in comparison with how quiet I was, I probably seemed like, Jekyll and Hyde, completely different.
Was that a fitting in thing?
Yeah, and just not, because any like work, school, anything where you kind of have to fit in and also put on a professionalism. I've never really liked that or understood it. It's like, can we not just all be ourselves? Like, I don't fear of going too far, of being too relaxed. Yeah, so I'm generally quite shy, quiet kid.
Yeah, interesting. And in terms of, so you mentioned reading, were there any other kind of forms of self-expression that showed up in those years? Or?
Yeah, so I, up until university, was going to be a drawer.
Yeah.
I was a really good life drawer. I could sit there for hours studying something. I liked the technical aspect of it and that sort of flow state. So in terms of like schooling, did okay, not great at GCSEs. Standout was English and art. Everything else was kind of subpar. Yeah. And then went and did a BTEC in art. Didn't really know what part of it I wanted to. My choices in terms of colleges were a bit limited, like geographically limited. So knew I didn't want to go this one place that was good for A-levels. Started out, I think, doing a couple and then didn't like it. And so then and went to Wigan and Lee College, where their BTEC was like very vocational. It's like, here is your studio space. You will be in here from 9 until 6 every day.
Yeah.
There are lessons, but it's almost like work. And I took it really seriously, having not taken GCSE seriously at all, to my parents' like dismay. And I was like up at 6:30 in the morning to get the bus to get in for 8:30. So it was, I don't think I've ever taken a job to that extent. Like it was very vocational, and that really worked well for me. So I could read and make art and do lots of drawing. Quickly found out that I liked the essay writing part of it more than the drawing. That was what captured my attention. Went and tried to do conceptual fine art. My professors were like, this is at university, were like, you can't submit an essay for a fine art piece. It's like, why? And then so switched to, my degree was in criticism, communication and curation, with an art and design, specifically looking at like 21st century art.
Yeah. I'm just thinking about your piece there. You could have, I don't know, you could have something typographically, like written the essay and then blown it up. I don't know, papier-mâchéd it on a weird, I don't know.
I was so uninterested. I really fell out of love at degree level with art. Everyone was doing, so it was conceptual art. Everyone was obviously like refining their practice. And I became obsessed with the cleaners who had thrown away art at points in like exhibitions, and like I did this art piece. It was absolutely insufferable, where I kind of, everything on the hour that was in front of me, I decide whether it was functional or functionless. And so I just didn't understand, or didn't really want to entertain the idea of art for art's sake at that point. It felt just a bit hollow, and I wasn't able to explore the things I wanted to explore in that way. And I thought words were a more accurate way of doing that.
That's interesting. Would you say that did you have the kind of the self-confidence to change lanes and do that? Not with certainty, because no one knows at that age. But were you confident in making that switch? Or I found that, just personally speaking, at that age, because I switched from, not a major switch, from graphic design to illustration, and I went from Bradford to Preston. But at that point, I didn't put anything on it. I didn't really put myself under any pressure. It was kind of like, well, someone said, my love of drawing and my determination to draw everything, even though it's a graphic design, graphic communications, there were audio, visual, and all these other pathways. But someone said, well, have you thought about illustration? What's illustration? Oh, there's that. That sounds good. I'll apply for that. I wasn't sort of in the mindset of this will get me where I want to go. I didn't know where I wanted to go. I was kind of following my heart to a degree, and then followed that kind of advice. Like, did you have any conviction, I guess, when you realised that you loved the words more? Was it a kind of, well, this feeling is enough?
No, I don't know. I didn't know myself that well. I think a big part of being shy as a kid was lacking confidence. That definitely came through into my like teens and early 20s. Just not enjoying it. I also went to apply I became quite into like, not prestige, but I wanted to go for big names, and they might teach me and give me and those things, which I don't necessarily believe anymore. And so I didn't tell my parents I was switching degrees because they wouldn't have forgiven me. And I tried to get into Central St Martin's. And so that's where I did end up going. And it was only when I got in that I told them, and they were like, oh, you've done this secret thing. And I kind of wanted to prove to people that I could do that.
Yeah.
I had no idea of the end place where I wanted to be. I've imagined myself as so many different professions and kind of thought, yeah, I could do that. And I'm still doing that to this day.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And so your role today, tell us about that a little bit.
So I'll kind of tell you what I did after uni and how. Because I think that makes more sense.
Okay.
So at uni, we did a whole bunch of subjects. I really loved my course. Lots of people didn't like it and thought it was quite surface level, like hopping from one thing to another, but it gave me exposure. It was amazing. So we did like pop culture. We had this amazing professor who was like an expert on comic books, and he did a whole lecture on vampires. We couldn't hear him because the vampire TV had it in. I've got a lot of love for Roger. He was a really like one of those proper inspiring tutors. And he he covered a really small module on journalism. So when I would go to Wigan and Lee College and get the bus, I would get the Guardian newspaper. I was like a sort of father of a family going to work. It's a weird thing to think that I would, because what else? I didn't have an MP3 player or something to kind of entertain me for that long. So I read a paper every day and was really into reading, but had never entertained doing it as a job. Until we started writing articles and got really into it. And my tutors were like, hey, these aren't bad. Like, maybe you could think about writing for magazines. And so did that, pitched, not a lot, but got into The Guardian, published a couple of pieces, and Vice and Dazed, and so I thought I was going to be like academic, because I'm quite good at studying if I put my mind to it. Actually, by the time I graduated, I sort of knew arts publishing, didn't really know what form, still didn't really believe a writer is a proper sustainable job, or that I even like doing it that much. Writing's quite painful. So I hadn't come to terms with that yet. Graduated, kind of hopped about, did some temp jobs at the university, didn't really know what I wanted to do, had like a parent pass, and that kind of made me go, oh, I've got to pull things into perspective. What am I doing? And then decided to really go gung-ho for journalism, and ended up doing okay freelance, like getting into all these magazines and working with photographers, and then really realised that I had a strong passion for current affairs. And I was doing that in art anyway, like contemporary art that spoke about the world and society. And then went and did my journalism qualifications. And so media law, having to do law exams when I didn't, the last time I'd done exams was about a decade previously. And did really well. Like I got the reporting, got like the highest in the whole college, which was amazing.
Yeah,
but it was
awesome.
because I pushed I don't think I needed to push myself that much. And then afterwards I worked for they're kind of like an impact agency, human rights agency, who also had a publishing platform called Little Atoms. So I was there for a number of years. And then kind of always straddled agency and journalism. Journalism is quite a precarious profession, particularly in the past 20 years, or ever since Facebook and Twitter took all the advertising money.
Yeah.
And so then also had staff roles in journalism. So I've been editors of sections and magazines and websites. And now I'm a content designer. So discovered I really like writing, got to grips with it, really exercised my writing muscles. And I think content designer makes sense in my industry. And when anyone else hears it from outside, it's a bit of a red herring. People go, oh, that must be visual, or, content creator. So any sort of product that has words, so be an app or website, I will kind of work within the product team and with user researchers to help craft those words to better fit the user's needs and also what the product wants to do.
Yeah.
If that isn't a more complicated way of explaining it.
No, it sounds very creative, actually, is it?
Yes and no.
Yeah.
It's quite logical. It's really logical, but it's problem solving.
Yeah.
So, I mean, yes, that's a bit of both, isn't it? It's not like you're creating something aesthetic and beautiful for the sake of it, but you do get to flex those muscles.
Yeah. Sounds like it requires a degree of empathy and proper understanding of a market and an audience and demographics and things like that, which I find an interesting challenge.
Yeah, it's surprising how it's basically listening to what the user wants and not going on assumptions, testing your own assumptions constantly, asking stupid questions, which is why journalism is a natural precursor to it, I think, because you can only really do good journalism when you get over yourself and put your hand up and go, I'm sorry, what does that mean? Yeah. What are you saying? Which takes a lot, and I don't even think I really got there when I was in journalism. but yeah, it's asking stupid questions, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, that's it. I find your background interesting in that switch from art, which kind of is a nice way to lead into this topic that we're going to talk about, which is, I don't know what to term it, intersectional art. And I don't know. Why did you tell me? And tell me that. I'd love to hear the origins of how you got into this. As you said, you've become quite obsessed with it, which I like.
Yeah, so I think we'll probably find a term after we've chatted about it.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
I got really I have no idea how I came across it. I got really into this research arm of it's owned by a couple of different companies and they've merged with others, but essentially a research arm of AT&T, the kind of communications giant in America. And I was actually checking my facts, and I realised that they've got 11 Nobel Prizes, and I wrote an article and it said 7. It's like, well, either I got that wrong or they've got a lot of Nobel Prizes in recent years. And so I will talk about Bell Labs and another program called EAT, which is Experiments in Art and Technology, kind of interchangeably. They are two distinct different things, but you'll kind of understand why they're kind of interchangeable. So Bell Labs, which had loads of engineers trying to come up with like the products of tomorrow. And so they were allowed to really think big. And so many of the things that we have, like C++ programming language and pixels and lasers and CD-ROMs, all come from this one research institute, which is enormous.
Which is mind-bending to think that that's come from one.
Yeah.
No matter how big, that's incredible.
It is incredible. I mean, a lot of that is to do with finances and AT&T having a monopoly at the time, which we'll kind of go on to because it sort of shapes them and explains why they are where they are today. They started I'm going to talk about this period in the late 60s, 70s, where they specifically worked with certain artists that was really innovative. So Bell Labs had been doing this program in one form or another since the 1920s, and they're still doing it now. Now it's Nokia Bell Labs. So AT&T have been broken up because of anti-monopoly laws, and it's been sold on and blah, blah, blah. So when they started, they were working with like a really big composer whose name I have, but my handwriting I can't read. Leopold Stockwski. Anyway, and that was around sound. And so in the late 60s, 70s, an engineer called Billy Kluwer, German, I never know how to pronounce the U with the umlaut over it, a bunch of engineers in his lab knew a bunch of artists in the kind of New York downtown scene. They went, why don't we work together? See what happens with that. And it turns out these artists were Andy Warhol, Robert Rauschenberg, like just the people you walk into Tate Modern now and see on the walls. And they had this series of kind of experiments that they just basically collaborated without any kind of tangible results, demands, and see what they could come up with.
It's absolutely amazing because I think in today's world I really think we sorely need that kind of thinking, that ambitious and bold thinking, because let's face it, there's a lot of things that need ambitious and bold solutions. At the same time, a lot of economies are crunched and there's this data obsession. So there's a lot of things that feel to me like it would just stop that from happening or make that very unlikely. But there's right off the bat, there's something really fascinating about that, isn't there? About those two worlds coming together. It kind of shouldn't. I feel like it kind of shouldn't be fascinating. It should be the norm, but it's not. But with those results, why not? I don't know.
I find it really interesting that this wasn't like some evil genius in a lab putting artists and engineers together and seeing what happened. Like, engineers knew these artists. Yeah. They admired them. They thought, yeah, that would be cool. Let's go and work with them. It's kind of spearheaded by really smart people who have an interest in the arts but don't exercise that muscle every day, and wanted to bring in an expert who does exercise that muscle every day and kind of see what happened. Going back to kind of the point that you made about it feels like it shouldn't be such a kind of rare gem thing to happen. In my opinion, it's an example of like artist as consultant.
Mm-hmm.
I think when artists work with brands, they're generally like artist in residence. Why don't you come in and look at our work and respond to it?
Mm-hmm.
And this is like a dialogue happening between an artist and somebody who's not in the arts traditionally. And seeing what they come up with, or just seeing how one can learn from the other.
Mm-hmm.
Is that not all management consultants? Like if artist is a flouncy word, consultant is a flouncy word.
Yeah.
You put them together, people are like, oh, it's just fluff, nothing's going to happen. But we've been getting in people not in certain areas of expertise to come and give their advice for donkey's years. And we all know as businesses, they really benefit from management consultants. So why wouldn't we do the same with artists? I think it's just an us problem of the way we view it, as opposed. I don't think it's anything new.
Yeah.
But it's still a hurdle some businesses have got to kind of get over.
I think so. I think in some ways, despite the constraints I mentioned earlier, there is more forward thinking, perhaps. There's a lot of great people like Ken Robinson, and fantastic books like The Element about what happens when people find their element and why they don't more often, and the kind of restrictions in education. The way that I interviewed a guy the other week, Duncan Wardle, who was the former head of innovation and creativity at Disney. He works independently now, helping to work with businesses, doing that kind of consultancy work, and he talked about it, and he said, we're all creative to a degree, and then we get into school and taught to colour in the lines, was the way he put it. And it's kind of, and then but quite quickly it's like, oh, well, they can draw, they're the creative one, and and it makes the others feel like they're not, perhaps, and therefore you take these paths and go for, I don't know, certain results in the curriculum, perhaps. So systemically, we're kind of led to, into these quite well boxed disciplines and subjects, and don't get me wrong, I understand that it would be very hard to have a fully open, like say artists running around with it wouldn't work to a degree. But there's an interesting point that John Newbegin made. I interviewed him. He was one of my first podcast guests, and he's chair of Creative England. And it was right after Nicky Morgan had first come out and talked about diminishing the arts and the EBAC. And he'd written like a kind of rhetorical piece in The Guardian about it. And it was great, and I approached him and got to interview him. But he told me about this study in Bristol where they looked at 400 really successful businesses and agencies, and one concurrent theme was that the ones that gave equal balance to business, arts, and tech were the ones that were flourishing, basically. Because I guess much like what's going on here, you had balance, and you had, the way you put it, the business minds would look at the bottom line and wouldn't necessarily be creative. Vice versa, creatives might have wonderful ideas but no idea how to implement them. Tech people might help to put that in a context, and so on. And I guess this is what's going on here in Bell Labs.
So I'd say Bell Labs is sort of kind of doing the opposite to that.
Yeah.
So it's not that you've got multiple strands working within silos in a company. Like they are sitting in on the talks, and engineers are working on something and going to the artist studio and saying, I want to do this. Or an artist is going, I really want to make this piece. I want an infinitely stretchy material. And the engineer's going, okay, we'll go away and figure out how to do that. I think step one is having those under the same geographical roof in the same location. Yeah. And step two is actually getting them to work with one another. And you were saying, we can't have artists running around. I think we can, to a certain degree. If I was going to court, I wouldn't want my lawyer to be an improv mime expert. But there are definite cases where I think we do this stuff already, but for some reason it seems too risky or artsy or something to do that, and it's actually not when you break it down into its logical components.
No, because there's a lot, but any artist, there's process involved, there's technique, there's study, there's knowledge in a certain way of seeing the world. Perhaps more important than anything else is the eye on the world and the way of seeing because that's fascinating when you put those kind of brains together.
Yeah, the muscle that they have stretched. Like, we are only, mere mortals. One person probably could do all those things, but they've not trained in them. They've not put in the hours of dedication. So, like, one of the big things of Bell Labs, or this program, which is Experiments in Art and Technology, that anyone can do, by the way. It isn't just confined to Bell Labs. The idea that and there are other versions that happen, but it's just this happens to be the biggest one with the big names. It's the one we all know. That it was the engineers that went and found, they knew the artists already. There's an idea that engineers are just sort of number-based people sat in a room not engaging with culture, and they are cool, interesting people, but they haven't flexed those muscles, so just don't have the 10,000 hours or whatever they needed to do to get to that place, and so they bring in artists to help them do that. So and that's the consultancy side. That's these people have got expertise. They clearly are good at something. These artists in particular, if you look at Rauschenberg and Warhol, and huge names of, like, you can't get bigger than that. And so these engineers, when the artists were kind of coming up, and they spotted that and went, let's create some. So they had like they had like a series of 9 nights. I think it might have been at the MoMA in New York, where they had, like, robots kind of, or machines slowly eating themselves, and really conceptual work that isn't a product. It's not a branding exercise. It's a mental exercise for both of them to work with one another. Bell Labs, that is now been taken over by Nokia, and it's another company as well in partnership, maybe a subsidiary of Nokia. They've kind of tried to bring back EAT, but it's more artists in residency. So it's like getting an artist to come and respond to something, which I think is the opposite of what EAT was. Yeah. It's not about getting someone in to, like, you make a nice drawing of your office, or, a conceptual piece based on your brand sort of identity. No, it's about provoking imagination, isn't it? And I think you helped with something really interesting with perception of art. And this, I recently interviewed Yasmin Ali, who is a chemical engineer in sustainable energy. She used to work in fossil fuel industry and switched to sustainable. And she wrote a brilliant book out recently called Power Up, and it's all about the global energy system and her experience of working in that, all different areas of it. And I found the stories she told incredibly imaginative and innovative, and the work that had to be done, and the pioneering and the breakthroughs. But when I used the word creativity and mentioned that to her, it wasn't that she was resistant to it. Yasmin was lovely, but it was, we sort of danced around the definitions of the things, and I saw a lot of innovation going on there, a lot of lateral thinking. And it's just really interesting how different people in different sectors perceive that. And I think that when you, like you said, under the same roof becomes a different story altogether. And I think that I would love to see people doing the work like Yasmin and her team with someone on board like that. I think that would be really fascinating. There was, so alongside Bell Labs, there was a program in the kind of from 1965 to the 80s in the UK called the Artist Placement Group. Much smaller. They were a collective of, I don't know how many. It was a couple, and then others kind of tied on, and then they kind of crumbled because of political divisions, as does often happen with, like, highly ideological groups. But they place artists in the Treasury, in the Home Office, and they weren't expected to come up with anything. They were expected to engage with this difficult subject, be it economics, forecasting, or dealing with very particular technical areas of, I don't know, British steel. And they were expected to not observe, but participate and try and ingest it and see what came out. Yeah. And that was an amazing programme. Really radical. You couldn't imagine nowadays, like, an artist engaging with it. It's fine to get, like, a poet laureate to go along and look at some people I don't know, in the House of Lords and write a poem about it, but you wouldn't expect them behind the scenes actually building policy and working with, MPs. And I think it's that side that I'm far more interested in. I think we pay a lot of lip service to that idea by getting artists just to merely observe and not actually get their hands dirty.
Yeah, and there's a lot of kind of like you said earlier. There's a lot of paint our logo or do a responsive piece to something else, but it's completely the wrong approach. Because it's about cross-pollination and changing the way people see their world and their work and generate ideas.
Definitely. And it's not lofty or even expensive in the grand scheme of things. If you think about what you might pay to a management consultancy company, an artist is a tenth of that. And even if you just have lots of smaller projects, all you need is for one of those to take off or impact or influence something. Maybe that's in a data-driven world, that stuff is harder to calculate, to keep an eye on, to monitor and to report back.
Yeah.
You do have to be given a lot of autonomy and freedom in a program like that, and to be entrusted that it's going to work, or if it doesn't work, it's okay.
Yeah, I made a note from your piece here to that end, and it was about where is it? Oh, mixed up. It was saying immediate returns were never a requirement. That's beautiful, and that was it. Setting up artists with a suitable engineer who came with no creative caveats. The only objective was to openly encourage unusual or complex proposals, knowing, I guess, that if every once in a while something amazing comes from it, which clearly did from the things you referenced in the piece. Was it Pixels? Was kind of
So I don't know how much came out of EAT. What will we kind of do, but also this is a really good way of shining a light on like how things come into fruition. It's very rarely one person with a light bulb and they go, oh, this, like, it gets developed, and there'll be one kind of prototype that turns into something else, and they'll be going along a totally different line, and they're like, oh, actually that laser that we use, that's interesting. What if you could like store data in this way and it could read it, and you go off on a totally different tangent. And so it has been credited. Pixels have been credited to that program, but I don't know what that linear journey looks like. It's also so for context, in case it wasn't clear. When I was at Little Atoms, I wrote an article on Bell Labs. So we had a print magazine, and it was like this big piece that I kind of went into Tate's archives and really tried to get as much as original information as possible. And it was really hard to get that tangible results, or even any documentation of what happened and how it impacted. I think part of that might be because it's commercially sensitive. They probably weren't writing this stuff down anyway.
Yeah.
And so to use it as a model, there's a lot of mythology and legend around it. But if Bell Labs are listening, please do open up your archives so people can see how that worked.
But didn't that come across through like a wind-up, the Pixel stuff? And to do with to phase one of the guys in there, they'd done all the sort of...
Oh, there was like a practical joke to do with, I assume, some sort of erotic imagery or something on a wall. Yeah. Right.
But even just in the the essence of that story, that it's that idea that, and this is a big overlooked thing, and this is something that Duncan Wardlaw mentioned, who'd been at Disney, does in his workshops. He gets people talking right off the bat about, he'll get them to lead in with, instead of, who I am, my job title, it's, what was your favourite childhood toy, and go from there. And immediately the energy in the room transforms. And love stories like that. It's like back in art college, there'd always be some creative wind-up of somebody else, and to think that could then kickstart something really quite pioneering and borderline revolutionary, I guess, if you're looking at it from a tech standpoint. I think that's incredible, but I think it's really important. I think when you enter that headspace, you start to tap into the unconscious when there's fun and when people are laughing and feeling energized and bouncing off one another. Going back to your point about being under the same roof, that's massively undervalued. Sorry.
Yeah, you actually made me think of something in art school when I was making art, that we were asked to make drawing machines, and I loved that. And I put loads of masking tape on a white kind of bit of paper, and it was huge, and then boiled a bunch of kettles under it. And so as the masking tape curled up, you would get these like really faint lines. And that's a playful, silly idea, but like, because you smiled when I said that, and somebody else next to me smiled, and before you know it, it's a starting point, as you said, and it's an obscure starting point. So you end up going down lines that you couldn't do otherwise. And exactly, you need those. Now it's going to sound like a kind of parlour game, those kind of unconventional points. But that's how you get original ideas of sort of slightly looking at things in a different way. And
you do, that's it. And that's why there's been a lot of talk recently about the dangers of this kind of algorithm at the minute, and a lot of sameness going on, because people are getting their quote unquote inspiration from the likes of Pinterest or a very limited amount of sources, whereas actually, there's a good reason why my lecturers used to tell us to go and pick a book off a shelf in a library you've never even gone near and read it, and don't put anything on it, because it will sink in there. And that's how the unconscious works, is by putting these very varying points of reference together, and then through the personality filter and the lived experience, that's when you get the completely unpredictable. And like you said earlier, one person having a light bulb moment, that can happen, but only if that has gone on and that sense of play and fun and a problem in the mind has happened.
Yeah, things have been percolating for you don't even realise it half the time. You're like, I keep coming back to this thing. And I found sort of before writing Bell Labs, like being very repetitive, always referencing it, being like, oh yeah, that thing that I'm stuck on mentally and can't kind of move. And I'm still at that place, like I've written about it, but there's definitely more to be done with it. There's a huge, I really liked an arts education. Like I went and did my, top ups of like law and media law and those things. But I really I responded well to an arts education.
Yeah.
It was a lot of independent learning. Like I could have just sat at home and done nothing, but the freedom of being able to look at all of these really vast topics. I got really into horror films, but like just a certain period of Hammer horror films. And there was a period in the 60s where they started to get really political. So there's like Dracula goes back and forth, where Dracula's like the head of a multi-conglomerate corporation. And we that was through a unit in English heritage. So we had gone to all of these like National Trust properties, and we were starting to look at like Englishness as a commercial thing. History is a thing that gets packaged. And then I was like, oh, the Wicker Man is a form of that almost. And I then went off into the BFI's archives and spent ages there going through all of these references. And at a time when arts funding, particularly education, is getting poo-pooed, getting cut, being told that you would never get a job afterwards, I just don't think that's true. There's definitely a lot to be said of like helping people with that, finding that path.
Yeah.
Is it the university's job to do that? Probably not, actually. Is there any other career where you're guaranteed, or is there any other educational programme where you're guaranteed a career afterwards? No,
of course not.
And so that's also society as a general. Like before the podcast started, we were talking about like squiggly careers and how people kind of jump around and you're always retraining. And that's a family unit thing of kind of teaching kids to hop about and try things. And you can be an expert in something. You can also then go be an expert in something else. Yeah.
And types of intelligence is really important there, which is also something that fascinates me about, EAT and Bell Labs is like design, for example, spatial intelligence is really important, and kinesthetic intelligence, which I am probably borderline devoid of. It's like, despite, someone who absolutely loves sports and has played a lot of sports over the years, I'm quite haphazard and clumsy. But I find that increasingly interesting. And there's a book called, I think it's Types of Intelligence by Howard Gardner that I'm desperate to get hold of at the minute. I think it's out. I tried to get it through Waterstones the other day. It's out of print. But again, really interesting. All of those things, intrapersonal, interpersonal intelligence, all of these things that are overlooked, quite blanketed in education. People, when you say arts education, there's going to be eye rolls from some people. But that's when you break it down and look at that and look at dance and drama and all the things that they do to activate people who might otherwise struggle. Isn't that what society is and needs to be? Like to work, to function, and to actually progress? It absolutely has to be.
Yeah, you really make this is going slightly off topic, but I've been thinking a lot about geniuses and what they are. So my partner's nephew, who's quite young, has decided to refer to himself as a genius, probably because his parents have said it, and he is now going around saying, "I'm a genius for this." It's probably not ideal behaviour to foster in a kid, but also like he's basically saying, "I don't have to try. I'm innately good at this thing," and anyone I've known who has been like that as a kid have suffered massively from it. It's like stop this now behaviour. And I was listening to a podcast recently with the journalist Helen Lewis. He used to be at the New Statesman, is now writer at the Atlantic, and she's writing a book on genius. And it's all to do with some of it is to do with like our modern ideas of geniuses. So look at Elon Musk. Oh, he's got the tech brain, but is like socially devoid. And it's like, that's not necessarily a genius. Look at the head of logistics of a certain company who has to bring together all these different types of people and communicate. We don't ever really think of genius in those terms. Einstein was a very different personality to the geniuses of today, where we just imagine them to be in rooms reading and never communicating with people. I think that's a modern mythology problem. I think if you actually looked at who we would consider to be pioneers, they are not like that. I was diagnosed with dyslexia at university. Was that a helpful thing? I don't know. I can remember going for my diagnosis, and the person who did it was really interested and really animated and kept saying like, "Oh, your brain's different, and but you're more likely to become addicted to drugs and alcohol, and there's all these things." And I walked around in my 20s being like, when does that happen? When does this inevitable kind of breakdown? And was quite scared of that for a while. And had nothing in common with any other dyslexic person none of us had in common with each other. We had somebody who was supposed to help us, and who kind of came in, and being at art school, I think we were like 70% dyslexic in the class. And I think the diagnostic criteria is having a higher than average IQ, or an IQ that means you could read to a certain level, but just not being able to read or write to that level. And so mine was picked up through spelling mistakes, how most people are. And that's not, I don't think, a diagnostic criteria it's a very big, wide-ranging thing. And I know now that my hearing isn't fantastic. So when I was much, much younger, I went to, because they thought something might be up with my hearing at some point. And they do this thing where they give you certain pitches, and you've got to press a button. When it gets to a certain pitch that you can't hear anymore, you won't. And I stopped pressing the button quite soon. So obviously I wasn't hearing things at certain frequencies. And also they would make up words, and the instructor would look away from me and face the wall, and I had to repeat the words back, and I'd always omit the last syllable. And I don't think it's an actual problem with my ear. I think it's cognitive.
Okay.
And so that probably falls into like, I wish English was a language that didn't use homophones and things like that. And that's definitely where I stumble. And so that's a huge thing to label someone with. And there's also this crossover between that and creativity. And I'm not I didn't find that very helpful. And that's not to say it doesn't exist or it can't help anyone at all. It's just my experience of it.
Of course.
I can't even remember how we got onto that subject. I got on a massive tangent. With IQs, back to that point, IQ is a big part of that diagnostic criteria. My IQ is much higher than it was then. Like, I do crosswords every day now, and I do puzzles, and it's a part of your brain that you exercise.
Yeah.
I don't believe an IQ test to a certain degree.
Ken Robinson talks about that a lot in his book, In the Element. He talks about the kind of, I think there's something about the person who invented the IQ decried it, like not that long after it, and they kind of went, "No, go away now. Like this kind of works to put metrics on things."
Yeah.
But he said it's flawed. Like the thing, it doesn't work. It doesn't take into account types of intelligence and all these other things. And Yeah, so I think you might be right on something there.
And like types of intelligence, I don't even believe that we know what those types are.
No.
Like the idea that you can be spatially aware was like, but I can be good spatially in some circumstances and bump into things the whole time.
I'm pretty good in the car spatially, but like getting through my front door can be an issue. You know, it's like I'm a body.
But you end up telling yourself that like, oh, I'm this person.
Learned behaviours.
Yeah. And you really do shut off a lot of things. There is something to be said for not labelling people. They're also incredibly helpful and like open doors in a diagnostic culture where you have access to certain things like funding that you wouldn't do otherwise, or, you know, medication or all these other things. But in terms of the narrative that you tell yourself, to be bad at something, it's equally bad to tell it to, you know, to be the kid calling themselves a genius.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I think that the, you know, I think my view on that, it's not a view, not a hard and fast view, but I think that everything overlaps to a degree. You know, the brains are relatively unique in people, and I've no doubt I exhibit many tendencies, and I sometimes wonder if I might be ADHD. I don't know, but I think it doesn't affect me adversely enough for me to seek a diagnosis, and I'm aware and I'm at peace with my flaws, and within reason know how to manage them. You know, so I don't know. But the fact that I've come this far and I'm aware and read quite a bit about the condition now. But I don't know if I'm or not. But I'm not worried enough to seek a diagnosis.
I think that has to be the only reason to seek a diagnosis. If you're like, this is really hindering my life, and oh God, this is miserable. Like then absolutely crack on. That should be there, and those people should have access to everything they need. Social media doesn't help. There's lots of times, and I definitely have but it also depends on the circumstance. Like sometimes I have lost so many phones and wallets, but then I hit a stage in my life and that doesn't happen anymore. And something switched, and I got better at routines and knowing myself, and knowing that I don't need 5 different bags and one bag with everything in, and so there's lots of things at play, as you said. Like, it's all messy. We love to define things because it makes sense of chaos,
which comes back to the, you know, this whole thing, and the Eat and Bell Labs, and that way of thinking is it's uncertainty. You know, it's our greatest fear. Kind of, we've evolved that way, and I think that creativity and the very nature of these projects, they bring on a great degree of uncertainty, and you have to embrace it for it to work, and we don't like doing that as humans. So I think it's part of the reason why there's always been this distrust of the arts and creativity at large, because it is scary. As per our conversation before this show, you know, I'm a latest freak out about my career trajectory, and it's just like, it is scary, and there comes a point when you have to go, well, God, I've come this far down a track, and this is what I'm good at, and I have to just work with these hang-ups. But in these projects, I think it's wonderful, because one thing that stood out, and I noticed on the notes here, it was about seeking artists that had social concerns and motivations about, I don't know if it's a better world is far too broad, but you know what I'm getting at. I think that's really interesting, and that choice of people, that is kind of a lot, I don't know, parameters enough, maybe. You know, it's that's great, because there's that motivation there, and there's cause, and there's, you know, that maybe that's good enough to put those people together and go, okay, you know, this is what I'm doing, this is what you're doing. Let's have a conversation.
Yeah, somebody described that period of Bell Labs, or the EAT program, as a quiet circus. And like, nobody really knew this chaos that was happening. And I imagine, I mean, maybe I'm dramatising it in my head, but there's quite strong characters to try and get them to work together and produce things. And there was, you know, lots of Billy Cliver, the guy who kind of managed it at this period at Bell Labs. Like, he really put himself on the line several times. He like handed in his notice, and his bosses were like, no, roll it back, we'll help you. So it's clearly like passionate, strong people who wanted to do this, and probably had very different opinions and ways of tackling it. if anything, it's a great exercise in learning how to work with people that are really different from you. Going back to my kind of current role at the moment as a content designer, I'm the bridge between, I speak to engineers and visual designers and then actual users, and have to kind of take all of these perspectives together and figure out, and also having my opinion, and somehow not compromise, but find the solution we all need that works for all of us. And sometimes I'll be going down my little rabbit warren, and then we'll end up speaking to somebody else at the company and then just being like, oh, right, yeah, I had never thought about that perspective. I should be thinking of that. And that's a lot of what I imagine. If I imagined an EAT program today, that's what it would be doing. It would be getting those people in a room, having difficult conversations. And also there's an element of having to explain complicated things to a 5-year-old, aka the other person who isn't in your profession, in order to find a common language and be able to articulate it in those ways. That's probably really useful for the engineers, because they all have their little shorthand and
definitely. And it was, to go back to Duncan again, he keeps coming up, but he told a great story of working in China, and they were designing a restaurant, like a new Disney place over there, and it was basically 15 white blokes, and he recognised that quite quickly, that they were, he termed it as a river of thinking, that they would be very much in their river of thinking. So he basically set off walking around the site to find somebody completely out of their loop, and he brought in one of the restaurant staff, Chinese girl, said, can you come and sort of, she wanted to help basically, and he got her to come in and sit in, and really quickly she did this sketch of kind of, having the local cuisine knowledge and everything else that just turned everything on its head. And he was like, I knew that would happen, kind of thing. And he's one of those people who's got the trust to do that, and not to buy into hierarchy and kind of go, well, let's bring them in because they're completely outside of this mindset, and they might just give us something that opens up everything. And there's something awesome about that.
Yeah, you've really got to trust the people. Like I feel quite privileged in a few. So I'm a freelancer, well, contractor. So I get embedded in companies for a while. Of being given that freedom of like going and talking to people and reaching out and being like, oh, you're in a completely different department to me and I've no idea who your boss is or really actually how senior or important you are. But can I have a one-to-one and pick your brains about something? And that is really when you come up with the most, or you get the most useful insights. It's the same a bit with user testing. So before a product goes out, it'll be tested again and again with multiple different types of users. And usually they go through like a vendor who will have, I don't know, they'll pay participants a certain amount of money. And I noticed over Christmas, I was speaking to my sort of in-laws, and they had like a banking issue. And he was like, but they've asked me to use the app and I don't want to use the app. I was like, okay, I don't know why you don't want to use the app, but that's, you're allowed to not use it. And they couldn't get past this blocker. I was like, I wonder if that's because all of the user participants have been of a certain age who get paid £10 per thing, and they have access to them and they're tech savvy, so they can do it remotely through their laptop. And we're probably not user testing enough with really old people. Like that's something that is really important, of getting much older people into tech companies, because if you want somebody who's got a different perspective and has no clue what you're talking about, and you have to make things clear. One of the things that came out of Bell Labs was like, if an idea is clear, like simplicity will travel through the whole thing. So the baseline has to be easy to understand, and everything that comes next or follows on from it, that will just travel through the whole thing. And what you get as well is you get people who will just, whether it's by default there because of a demographic and being so detached, or whether it's just someone who's not in that, to use that again, river of thinking, people will challenge a status quo. And, when you bring people together with vastly different experiences and skill sets, then they will do that. They'll question something that was so accepted by everyone, maybe just through familiarity, or because that's the way it is, or the way it's always been. Which is, there was an example actually that I reading a book about habituation at the moment called Look Again. It's the power of seeing what was always there. Really interesting. And there's a chapter start of a chapter about a guy called Dick Fosbury. And I didn't know the slightest thing about high jumping, but he
invented what is known as the Fosbury flop, the way they jump, the kind of arched back over the bar. That wasn't always the way until a certain point. It was always front first. And he tried various different college sports, eventually committed to high jumping, couldn't beat the 5 foot, it won't be meters, 5 foot mark to get over the bar. But he had been studying engineering, and this was what gave him the idea to try this by using what he'd learned about the terms, the dynamics, the science. He tried that, and it worked for him. And quite quickly, everyone was like, "You're mad! It'll never work." Oh, it worked. Let's all try that. Eventually, he won Olympics, the first Olympics. After that, he was nothing because everyone did it. Yeah. And then he was reverted then to his previous stature of not quite being up there. But really interesting case study of someone with a different eye on the world and different experience set, just thinking to challenge what everyone had accepted so readily.
We're I don't know if you're allowed to mention current affairs in the podcast, or if you want
completely.
Like this is on a day where we've just found out that Facebook are going to get rid of fact checkers and Instagram. Because,
is that right? Yeah. Oh shit, I didn't hear that.
So
on what basis?
Because they want to be like X, because Trump's going to come into power, and obviously he has got the power to ban things like TikTok. And I think we're about to start, this is going to be the end of those platforms. They're all going to roll into one cesspit. Their functionality is going to be poor and terrible. And how, to be Facebook and to go, I want to be more like X, that's not because the functionality of the platform, it's access to power.
Yeah.
And so Nick Clegg resigned from there, like whatever he was, head of marketing or comms, and so this sort of clearly is why that happened. Mm-hmm. And that's a need to fall in line. That's mm-hmm. everyone wanting to have ear of the president.
Yeah.
And they'll all sort of snowball into, hopefully, out of existence, and other things will come along. I mean, I don't think any parent or citizen in society at the moment is thinking we need more social media.
No, don't get me started on that one. I've been banging on about that quite a bit recently. Read The Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt, and it's quite scary. Like, the mental health crash that it's brought about is horrible. But there are things happening now, and more awareness. Australia have been, I think, the first to ban or to bring the age restriction 16. Just sorely needed, but yeah, that's a whole other can of worms.
Yeah, and there you have sort of Zuckerberg saying that he doesn't like what the EU have done in terms of limiting what they can and can't do, and that actually it's a freedom of speech thing, which it's not. That's not what freedom of speech is. And it just to get rid of all fact checkers.
Yeah, that's so irresponsible.
And why? Is that because so many people are being censored? Are they?
No.
Have you been on Facebook?
Yeah.
No, they're not.
No.
Like the algorithm, and particularly in Instagram, will be demoting and promoting other things. I don't think that's a question of that's probably more of an issue of freedom of speech, actually. Mm-hmm. If you're a big platform, just only promoting the things that everyone else is talking about, and they're huge. What's the word? Like, they are doing that. They are culprits. Mm-hmm. In terms of algorithm and flattening culture.
Yeah, massively.
Yeah, so it's funny that that's what their rallying cry is against. It doesn't make any logical sense.
No, it's a very. It was raw. I was chatting to Rob recently, and he sort of said, like, surely now is the time when we can kind of go, no, this was okay for a while, social media, but should we do away with it now? It's not doing anyone any good, really. And he said it's like when someone starts out with the start of a night out being really likeable and cool, and then after a few beers are completely acting like a twat and right, come on, off you go, time to go home. He said it's that with social media, and I don't think he was wrong, to be honest. You're not completely blanket, but I think there's a lot of truth in that. Yeah,
it's shown its true colours. Yeah. And, okay, I've got a cheap table and chairs from Facebook Marketplace, and I now know what somebody I went to school with is doing with their life. But there are avenues to do that elsewhere. Yeah, and I also don't think that's that helpful to know what people...
No, we're not. No, we're not. There's there's very much threshold as to how many people we can be in touch with and have meaningful relationships. So no, I don't think so. It's people come and go in your life, don't they? It's That's interesting. Do you think that's a factor in all of this, in terms of why programs like what Bell Labs did, why they might not be taken up because of the political landscape, and because because there's a lot of looking backwards at the moment, because there's a lot of challenges, the collective challenges that we face at the moment. So a lot of people are, whether it's nostalgia or hankering for something that is being over romanticized. I mean, it's hard to. I think it very much stands in the way of progress and of forward thinking like this. Do you think so?
Yeah, a great example is films. So I was listening to a podcast recently where they talked about The Godfather, and they were like, that would be a niche indie film nowadays.
Yeah.
And the kind of marvelisation of the movie industry and how difficult it is to get a mid-budget film made. Mm-hmm. So low indies, like most people can self-fund, but the big studios, apart from A24, they are the ones funding kind of a couple of £1 million films. It kind of rolls on to another point that I think links in with Bell Labs, and that's the kind of Arts Council funding model. Mm. So Arts Council don't really fund based. The idea is that they had lots of smaller bits of funding they could give out to lots of people, and you could kind of spread it like seed funding, and one of those things might take off. And Bell Labs is it's a similar idea. Like, you can have lots of interesting things going on, and then hopefully one of those things will take off. Whereas everybody is just trying to chase that multi-millionth thing that you can just sit back, and you and generations to come of your family will never have to lift a finger ever again. Those huge wins. There was I was, just before I came here, I was looking at the comedy bit of the Golden Globes. Can't remember her name, the female comedian who did it, and she was saying like, oh, isn't it great to see a bunch of artists in a room, and all they want to do is make enough movies so then they can develop that one tequila brand that they'll never have to make movies ever again. And it's like, yeah, why is that a thing that people are doing? Like, surely, I've not seen Megalopolis. I've just watched Mark Commode's reviews of it, which were absolutely awful. But like, good on him for funding this like big project that nobody else would. And yeah, it's probably navel gazing, and it's a good idea to have editors look at your work and give you notes and feedback. But yeah, we're all chasing the Elon Musk, the Zuckerbergs, that incredible level of fortune, without ever deciding if that's good for you as a company or as an individual or for idea's sake.
Yeah, I did. I was painting live at a part of the panel. I know we talked about Kyle Jacob, but it was the one in Cannes Lions, and on the panel was Lucia Aniello, who's like an Emmy Award-winning director in the States, and that's what she was talking about quite specifically was, how hard it is to get an original idea funded now in the world of big streaming platforms, when it's kind of like feed the expected and the guaranteed hit. It's very slippery slope.
It's weird because obviously an appetite, because people will reference an A24 film. Never before has the studio that has made the film impacted your critical judgment or your appetite for it. You didn't go like, oh, that was a Paramount film. You would never have known. No. But because they've got, with that, that it's like a small, medium director and original ideas, and they are able to take an idea and roll with it, which is exactly what Bell Labs was able to do. That it's probably worth 2.5 hours of your time to go and watch it and really see something that makes you feel. I was reading a post by a guy who works in publishing in Ireland, and he was talking about what he looks for in submissions for fiction or particularly fiction novels. And he was saying, just something that makes me go, I'm glad that you were there to see that and tell me about it from your perspective. And that's what we want in all culture. And so to be able to diversify that. Also, the Bell Labs argument goes back just to diversity in general, I suppose. It's like, let's have all these different perspectives and voices in a room, and something truly interesting will come out of it.
Yeah, of course it will, and it does. And that's why I love talking to scientists and the likes on the podcast, and psychologists and neuroscientists. And it's areas that going back to your earlier point about underwhelming in GCSE, is very much the same. I couldn't apply myself. I didn't, I don't know if it's, don't know what it is. I just couldn't, unless I'm passionate about something, I find it quite hard to give the level of commitment that was required to pass those exams in my case. And yet now my book pile by my bed is full of, before I go to sleep recently, I've been reading Marcus Aurelius Meditations, and it's like, and books on habituation, and what I've got is this lens, which is creativity, which just benefits from the vastest range of things, and I really love it, and it's actually become my leading passion now in life, is learning. Maybe I absolutely love it. I love hearing that. When you sent me the story for this, it's incredible, and I've lost my point where I was going with it, but
no, I think that that is definitely what art school taught me, was the ability to walk around, hoover loads of stuff up that is none of your business. You should not be in that room talking to those people, even pretending like you know about something. Like, art is a very good way of being introduced to something that you're not expected to be like the scientist who will understand every element of that. Like, being a novice is an attribute. It is a positive thing in a room of somebody going, I have no idea what you're talking about. But, a big part of my job is asking stupid questions.
Yeah. Sorry, I've remembered my thread now. That was it. That's why I love just talking to this crazy range of people. I really love it, and I'm not afraid to be the novice. It's in some of the earlier ones I would feel a little intimidated. Like, I had a lady called Mariana Pastana, who was the curator of the V&A on the show, and she's one of the few people who left me completely flummoxed in the interview in the best possible way. Like, she's just so articulate, and the stuff she was talking about was really cutting edge. And some of my responses was just like, wow. And it was just like, I didn't have a lot to come back with to some of that stuff. She was great. But I love that. And that's why, one of the people I had was a microbiologist who was using AI to study the gut microbiome. Really interesting work. And she was saying about the creativity of science, it's quite different to art in the sense that you've got a fixed outcome, but there are many, many ways to get there. And that's the creativity of the science. It's again, bringing the personality and the lived experience to it to get there, and having those ideas. Whereas art can be more open-ended, doesn't have to be, but can be. And so I just find that really interesting. And it's the same with anything, like the guy who did this studio, I featured in a chapter in the book because I saw him being imaginative, innovative to get this together for me, like the door that would open to create this. And he didn't consider that creative. So I went for a pint and convinced him why that was creativity. And I love that. And I just think that we all learn from each other, and the world does sorely need that.
Definitely. The idea that we're all going to dress the same and watch the same thing. And I don't know, that's an upsetting idea that we could all be in that world, because the amount of stimulation and interest and motivation to do things, like I'm seeing a lot more within my friends, like a lack of motivation sometimes, and I think maybe that is to do with like a flattening or not going, I've seen this really different thing and look at that, because we're all watching the same things on TikTok
and overwhelmed with so much.
Yeah, and there's it doesn't spur this like weird pathway that connects this other thing that you've seen. I went to see two things that connected weirdly that I've been like in my head rattling around that I don't know what to do with, but just really interested me. Was I went up to see Dennis Sever's house in Spitalfields. So this is a kind of Victorian era like townhouse in Spitalfields that this eccentric American guy in the 60s bought and then decided to revert back to exactly how it would have been. And you can have, he's died now unfortunately, but you can go and have these silent tours around this house. And so what looks like a house exactly how it should have been, like there's a coal fire in the middle of London. I don't know how they got around DEFRA kind of regulations to do that. But if you look closely, like the bed's made of polystyrene and crates, and it's history, but it's like one person's interpretation of history. And the weird thing that I got from that was like, oh my God, I can't see anything, because it's the tours are really lovely around Christmas. If you're going to go around then, because they really do it up with like decorations and it's all candle lights everywhere, and you get to really imagine what that would have been like. And then I saw Nosferatu over the weekend.
Did you? I'm thinking I'm going to see it this week.
And there was a scene in that where it was so warm and smoky and compact, and it's like, that's exactly what that would have been like. And I don't think anyone appreciates how smoggy and the inability to like see things properly in a room, and how that changes aesthetics. Like, we're a part of a book club, and we were looking at I can't remember what the book was called. It's like a Japanese short thing to do with light.
Oh God, yeah, it's one that I came across through Carol Shaker's book. In Praise of Shadows.
Yeah, and it's how like lacquer, the kind of Japanese technique, was never made to be seen under electric light.
Yes,
and that has all been designed for candlelight, and it's context essentially is what this thing is giving you, that gives you a whole new appreciation. The thing with like social media is you just get a frame of something, you get no context behind it. How are you ever supposed to add that in a 10-second thing that's just you and your perspective? And I had going to that house and doing something that is totally unrelated, and going to seeing Nosferatu and going, oh my God, yeah. That it was really smoggy. That's exactly what that would have added to the atmosphere, and it was a whole new appreciation for it.
Yeah, it's amazing. I love those. I love those kind of connections. Yeah, it's something I'm kind of re-seeking at the moment in my life. You know, I've definitely taken a step back from social media and then trying to make it work for me again, just in a really minimal way for work. I mean, I've never used it personally, to be honest, and never spent a great deal of time on there, but certainly been guilty of a bit of over scrolling like the next person here and there. But since taking more of a step back from that, I've noticed my unconscious doing its thing more, without a doubt, and especially because I've broadened my reading out and, you know, getting outdoors much, and by being a twin parent, that forces me to you know, take on new experiences and watch them, their imaginations going, and I love it so much. I love those random ideas, and, you know, if I could get myself to a position where I just write fiction, then I could really let rip with all that.
But also, it's like to go like to entertain boredom.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's that thing, this weird connection, these two things rattling around in my head. I think I need boredom to actually face them and sift through them. I can't revisit it and revisit it and revisit it and figure out what's going on if I'm just scrolling online.
No, because your brain is consciously and constantly in conscious mode. Whereas to let a bit of that unconscious in, you need space and time. You need active idling.
It's like my generation. I used to live in London, and then just before COVID moved down to Salisbury. And having a much quieter life. I was never home in London. I don't think I ever had milk in the fridge. I was a vegetarian purely for the fact that meat goes off so quickly and vegetables aren't going to kill me if I leave it a day or two. I was never home. And, you know, I was either at a gym class or doing this or out with friends, and like had my diary stacked, and just COVID was an absolute infall, and I loved it. And I'm so much calmer. I'm a logical thinker now. I'm at that, for me personally, that's benefited me massively. But then my friends back in London who were being like, I can see that, oh, I'm doing this and I'm doing that. It's like, what are you doing? It's like things really outside of my comfort zone. Yeah. Like, I took up whiffling this summer.
What's whiffling?
Which is, I can't believe I've not talked to you about
I think you
this.
have, but the words throw on me.
So we have this big giant in Salisbury, Christopher. He's in the museum. He's like kind of medieval, but actually our version is like a 60s one. And it's me and the local councillor and lots of other like historians. I mean, the average age is about double mine. Yeah. And we bring him out for like May Day when the mayor's doing his thing. And I suddenly got really into like the idea of puppeting. And because so traditionally Christopher has just kind of been like a floppy thing on wheels that wasn't very animated. Different versions you could open his mouth, but not the one that we currently have. And so I came along and did my first whiffling stint and was like, oh, we need to get his arms up and, you know, very long poles so they can really go over his head and wave at people. And the first time we did that, I mean, the local council described it as biblical, which I'm not sure I agree with. But there was like little girls coming up to him being like, I love Christopher.
Wow.
and like being hugged by him, and just seeing him to be able to like, so it was like a changeover of mayors we had, and it was in the Guildhall, and Christopher kind of cheekily, opened the window and put his hands in. And like he's never been able to do that before. And all of a sudden there's like a mythology, because he had this little hobby horse that's actually really scares kids, and it's not that fun being in the hobby horse because they cry when they see you. And it was known for like pushing kids in rivers and like that sort of old, like medieval, like quite unpleasant, fooling around. All of a sudden Christopher was able to develop a character. I would never have done that in a million years. I was forced into a situation where I do not belong. I categorically do not belong there. And everyone was laughing at me, being like, what is wrong with you? Yeah. But I really love it. And, I was nervous and shuffling my feet and didn't know what to say to anyone, and was like, they're kind of looking at me, what the hell are you doing here? But that kind of sparked a whole load, and it got me really thinking about storytelling. And I was like, we need to have a story for Christopher. He's got no, but how do we tell those stories? How do we start to get people interested in these things? And
it creates communities, doesn't it? Whether it's Bell Labs, whether it's you doing the whiffling, it's by doing those things and getting out of comfort zones, it ingratiates you into your community. You know more people, you learn things, you have fun, you have stories to tell, and that's the richness of life, isn't it? And I think it's, like you say, it's a sad thought, isn't it, that everyone's just sort of on these tech platforms and just watching the same things and listening to the same things, and only certain artists and certain filmmakers are getting the finances and stuff. And I hope there'll be some kickback, because there has to be, really. I mean, but then how much kickback can there be when people can't afford to do it? That's the danger, isn't it?
Yeah, I think there's a strong financial argument for something like Bell Labs and for funding small to medium-sized projects. Like, if I was a huge studio, I don't know, you can fund a Marvel film, and what if it goes tits up?
Yeah.
There's a great book out at the moment. I got My Partner for Christmas, which is about the biggest flops in cinematic history, and it really charts trends, and it's an interesting way of looking at film by what doesn't succeed, and the horses that everybody bet on that didn't work out, and why that happened. And it's a good way to look at it as a funding model, and historically how we've done things. But go make more stuff, more of it, not just like billions and billions of pounds on this one thing, and then doing 15 different versions of it. It's this thing of like bringing back stories we've already told. I don't know. I think there's only so many ways you can do Shakespeare. Yeah. And there's an actor recently, I was reading an interview with him. He's in 2 versions of Hamlet this year. I was like, that's just a coincidence, surely. Yeah. But like, do we need that? So to go back to the kind of financing, AT&T were huge, like, communications. But the Bell Labs was from like the guy who invented the telephone, Edison Bell, is that his name? And so, which then kind of snowballed into, and they had to get broken up in the end because of anti-monopoly laws in the US. It's like you've got too much of the market.
Alexander Bell.
Yeah, that's it. I was like, that's definitely not his name. I'm merging 2 different things.
Thomas Edison.
That's it. But that's how we got there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Throw something out that's a bit wrong.
Vulnerable in this podcast. The people that listen as well know my absolute lack of knowledge about most things. That's how it was funded. But I mean, apart from the engineer's salary and some studio space, I can't imagine that they were burning through like $100 bills and using gold-plated materials and things. It's actually relatively cheap, and it's not lofty, and it's not, you can only do it under ideal circumstances. It is a real cheap, practical way of doing interesting things. Yeah.
And I think we have to stop thinking about it as like absolute navel gazing. It's only if you won the lottery would you be able to do this, because look at you're able just to be creative. No, it's a really practical solution to things.
Yeah. It is definitely, and I mentioned to you the art and manufacturing project that was part of the Festival of Making, which is fantastic. And I know Eleanor, who runs co-runs the Deco Public, the company who do that, and it's grown over the years, done an amazing job. And they commissioned me to do 3 podcasts on the art of manufacturing. One of them was the Martin Ware one that I sent you, and so he did. Martin Ware did a pivot from producing and being part of Heaven 17 and God, what's his Human League, and now does these industrial soundscapes. Does them all over the world, like in exhibitions and everything, and did well, made money, but just saw commercial everything was getting in the late 90s and got out. But he was just one of many great ones. I made just a couple of notes here, but they're so cool. There was Jacqueline Donerty, a multimedia artist, did a project called Imperial, which is a film inspired by a combination of fast beats, slow canals, and the repetition of industry. The manufacturer is housed in Imperial Mill, the imposing former textile mill, built in 1901 on Blackburn stretch of the Leeds-Liverpool Canal. And created the work that could be presented in situ, inviting an audience to experience the canal and rediscover it as a place for cultural activity. Ideas like that just get me going, and it's just... And what I recognised when I interviewed not just Martin, but Dewinda Bansal, who'd done the making of a South Asian wedding in the Arndale Centre in Blackburn, it's just the sheer illumination that it brings to the place and the people who come and the people who work in those places of industry. So Martin was recording like the Silent Night Factory and other places of industry and getting these really quite ambient sounds and the workers talking, using that within the projects and the likes. And Nicola Ellis, who did one in Rutherden, who do the street furniture. So they do all the electric boxes and things that you don't ever stop to think, that's a family business that survived 2 world wars and all these things. And it's just, but Nicola's presence in there and her love of what they were doing and excitement to be making a sculpture, reflecting that and the conversations that were going on between the two. Just to be in there for half a day and interview her and see that going on made me want to stick around, and it's just, she was getting stuck in with the welding and all sorts, and it was just, it's incredible. Really, really great to see.
And if you're a business, like Artist Placement Group did this in the kind of 70s, where they got an artist to go along to, it would have been a factory up north, and they got the factory workers to paint and decorate their own stations. So I can't remember if it was like textiles, but they kind of all had this one bit of machinery that had like a hood or a cabinet over it. And that really gave them a sense of personalisation. And kind of it re-energized them more than an away day and like a subscription to a Calm app or whatever it is that people are giving people nowadays. So like it's artist as consultant, as business consultant. It's not lofty for the sake of it, for emotion. It can solve a lot of financial problems. It can really energize your employees, come up with ideas. It's so important to get people who are interested in things and I mean, how much do we know when we're in a company if there's one person who's like infectious, who can come into a meeting and be like, oh yeah, what about that and this? And somebody else goes, oh yeah, that's really interesting too. Like that, I think, is a lot of great artist work, actually, is they're super into what they do. And then over time they get to hone their skills. And so not only are they super interested in what they do, but they're also practically really good at it. I'd love to see more studies around the finance of it, and to see big, like even creative agent, the number of creative agencies I've worked at that have tried to have like kickstart programs where you will kind of enter a raffle and you have to go for a coffee with somebody who's not in your team just so you can get to know each other. And how people don't turn up to these things. We don't like new weird circumstances. We don't like building trust games and Lego models and away days.
It's just so formal and soulless, isn't it? And it's not for the it's like you say, with an artist you get someone who uses imagination and thinks differently as their bread and butter on a daily basis. So to bring that to a place where it's maybe quite the opposite or somewhere close to, then it just even if you just inject a little bit of that into it, you're going to get much further than a silly process like that.
Yeah. And it's a much cheaper way of doing it as well. Like a little bit of infectious kind of camaraderie will go a long way. If you think of the damage a disgruntled or unsatisfied employee can do to a company, or even just low mood in a team, Just from that perspective alone, it's worth, let alone like the actual ideation and the kind of the more tangible benefits. Although I'm looking at my notes and all I've written is no tangible results in capital letters, because that was so important with this.
Yeah. What do you mean in terms of?
In terms of having that as a stipulation when you run a program like this, it's not an artist in residence.
Yes.
No thanks, Nokia Bell Labs. Your recent versions are not true to the principles of the EAT program. And then anyone can do EAT. And so maybe anyone who listened to this who's in an agency, as you turn around and you go, we need to do EAT.
Yeah.
And we will, become one of that. We'll take that program and we'll do it in our own company, and we'll get an artist in just to kind of sit at a boring meeting.
Yeah.
Imagine a kick-off meeting to a new project and there's a complete stranger in the room who's got a totally different perspective, who puts their hand up and goes, why are you doing that?
Yeah.
That could be hugely beneficial. And a quiet circus. A little bit of chaos isn't a bad thing. It isn't. Chaos is natural in life. I think it's really important and we can all manage it. Yeah. There was sorry, this is like, I know we keep trying to end this. And it's like, but this thing that I've thought of. There's this great New Yorker writer who, I can't even remember his name now. I loved his work. He's based in the UK. He, on his website, when he was clearly still freelancing and writing for other people, he pitched himself as like somebody who really likes to understand systems. He said that when he first went into an airport and was like, how does this work? He's like, no, hold on. I'm a human being. This is designed for me to understand. I am just going to go through this and experience it and figure it out. It's like, that is what all journalism and all art and all everything should be. If you want to report back on something, it's just going, this is made for me. Yeah. I know I don't feel like I should be here, but I am here and I'm just going to give my take on it. You're not going to be, you don't have to be an expert on things. No. That's when you get in an expert to be like, is this right? Is this okay? Yeah. And they will give their judgment. And that's also another thing that makes EAT so brilliant, is that they are experts working with one another. Yeah.
Yeah, very well curated. Brilliant. Well, this has been a pleasure.
Cool. Yeah. Sorry, I've probably gone on for ages.
No, it's a topic we could go all day about. So yeah, that's cool.
It brings up so many other things, and it's that maybe actually the whole theme of it is like stuff that you kind of know goes together and you don't know why, and the beginnings of ideas of when you go, oh yeah, that thing and they're kind of what, and that's something that we don't ever talk about, like the chaos of things, and what are the chances of you seeing, the chances of me seeing Nosferatu and that thing in the same weekend, and then suddenly going, oh yeah, the light of that is
that's where you have to lean into the unknown and trust. Trust the path you're on and trust the experiences you have and how you're going to interpret that.
Yeah, and if it's not working, go somewhere else.
Yeah,
like if you're not getting that energy, go somewhere where you're not supposed to be.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the sort of stuff, not to open a whole new can of worms, so that's the sort of stuff that is going to help people be more resistant to AI and automation. Because if it's truly human and it's that organic, then there's only so much of that you can replicate. Huge thank you to Caroline for taking the time to chat about everything with AT&T shaping modern art. I hope you enjoyed that one. I thought it was such a brilliant topic, and I'm delighted that Caroline brought that one to me. And I know we went on for quite some time, but I like to think it's interesting stuff. I wouldn't leave it in there for you if I didn't. I did clip a couple of bits, so don't worry. I do consider this, but I do like long form. I like long form journalism conversations. You can always skip a few bits if it's not for you. I used to do the highlights edition, but it was getting to a point where, my word, I was spending a lot of time, and I love spending a lot of time on this, especially with you guys. But as you know, I've got to pay the bills like anyone else with illustration and my writing and everything else. And I've been writing a bio this weekend to try and encapsulate the three, and it's not going to be a blanket use, but I've got a project coming out in March at Paradiso Festival that I'm a part of in Mexico, run by Hector Ayuso, who founded and ran Off Festival for 24 years. And I've been blessed with the chance to write Hector's story, and we agreed to write it in a short story format. So it's a book written as a short story, a biography, and I've illustrated the whole thing too. And what's the most beautiful of all of that for me is that it really called on all of my humanity. I had to bring my empathy, my understanding of Hector, and we spent over 6 hours, very candid conversations, as Hector told me about a life full of extremes and risk and sadness and highs, and it was really quite the experience. And I had to use all of those skills, those types of intelligence that we touched upon in that conversation, my sensitivity to relay that story in a way that did Hector justice. He's a fascinating human being, done so much for the creative industries. And I really adored that project because it brought everything that I love doing together. And I thought there's more I'd like to do by pooling these skills. So I wrote a really short bio. You might have seen it on the social channel, _creative condition. I got some great feedback, ended up speaking to a copywriter friend who helped me knock it into shape. It's there now. But it's a great way to try and do this. I'm trying to adapt, like I mentioned at the start of the show. There is only so much you can adapt depending on the way things go with the likes of AI. But I'm trying to be courageous, I'm trying to be brave, trying to find the excitement in this shake-up that we're going through right now and look for the opportunity and bringing those skills together and doing something that can't be replicated or automated. So we're going to have to watch as all this plays out, but I love doing that. Would love your feedback on the show. You can send it to me, ben@bentalon.com. You can always suggest yourself for a guest. I know some podcasts don't accept submissions. I very much do. I get a lot of my guests through submissions, through PR and individuals getting in touch. If you're doing something interesting and you're passionate about it and it chimes with the way I want to take the show, I'll have you on. So let me know. Get in touch. Feedback for the show, thoughts, ideas, anything at all you want to send me, feel free. Very approachable. I'm on LinkedIn and Instagram too. So there you have it. That's that for this week. Got Pogus Caesar coming up soon. We've got more of the Creative Condition diary as I ruminate and muse on creativity day to day and write down those raw, unrefined thoughts. You can read that over at thecreativecondition.com. I post the audio versions as I release them as podcasts for those of you who have less time to listen, or maybe I have friends who are dyslexic who prefer the audio version. So if that's you, there's an option for that too. But keep in touch, guys. Let me know whether you're new to the show. I'd love your feedback. If you're a long-time listener, let me know your thoughts and the direction of it. I'm up for all of it. Big thank you to the founding sponsor of the show, Illustration X. You can find out you can see their global range of illustration and animation portfolios over at illustrationx.com now. Such great work. Big thank you again to Caroline. Looking forward to seeing you guys again next week. Keep me posted on what you're up to. Have an awesome week. Stay creative. Take care.